All right, let's talk about Europe in the Dark Ages. Before the Crusades happened, and actually during the Crusades too, Europe struggled through the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages, also called medieval Europe or the Middle Ages, can be described as a period of decentralization and fragmentation. Decentralization and fragmentation. What does that mean? There's no strong central power. There's no big empire. There's no large dominant empire that's controlling trade in Europe at this time. What's one of the reasons why the Holy Roman Empire was the strongest empire, but it still couldn't rule over everybody? What weakness did the Holy Roman Empire have, or who was basically keeping the Holy Roman Emperor from getting too much power? Oh, I heard it. The Pope and the Church. You are correct. At this time, there's a wrestling match going on pretty much between the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor. They're going back and forth. So there is divided power between the Church and the Holy Roman Empire in the Dark Ages. So if we look at Europe, we can see that Europe is not like one strong power. For the most part, the nobles are running basically their small little kingdoms. The nobles, for the most part, are running small little kingdoms, and the emperor doesn't actually have that much power. Now, the nobles have their own little armies. Who are their soldiers in the armies mostly? They are the knights. And then you have the peasants who are working the land. If we look at it as a triangle, the nobles are, the emperor and the pope are on top. Then you have the nobles, the knights, and most of the people are poor peasants at this time. So here we have the peasants. They're working the land right there. That would be the majority of people. And as we know, they were not very well educated. Most peasants weren't educated, which meant there was little intellectual growth, almost no intellectual growth at Europe in this time. Also, there was limited educational growth because people weren't reading things like the Greek works. Why wouldn't they read the classical Greek works that we talked about? The Greeks were polytheistic, and it was considered blasphemy or against the church and against God to read like a scientist who was polytheistic from ancient Greece or Rome. So the European economy grows stagnant. Stagnant is, stagnant economy. I'll explain what these terms mean, stagnant and economy. Let's start with economy. You've probably heard economy. People talk about the economy being bad, there's no jobs. What does economy actually mean, though? It's basically the buying and selling of goods and resources. So it's like using resources and buying and selling them. Who's doing a whole lot of buying and selling of goods and resources at this time? China and the Silk Road. We have the Muslims are part of a big trade empire at this time. And Europe is not. Europe is not engaged in much trade. And almost always what happens in society is if you're not trading a whole lot, you are stagnant, or it means you're not getting better, which means you're usually getting worse and going down. So the Muslim world in China, they're doing a lot of trade. Even West Africa is part of a trans-Saharan trade route that we talked about. But Europe, not so much at this time. There are some trade routes, but nowhere near like what's going on in the Silk Road and the Indian Ocean trade routes. So there's a stagnant economy, which means most people just keep doing the same thing. Very much agricultural or a farming-based economy. The nobles are getting taxes from the peasants. The knights see some of the money, and these guys fight each other every once in a while, and it goes back and forth. And that's a lot of what happens during the Dark Ages. So the Crusades and trade actually bring an end to this. The Crusades and the trade actually bring an end to the stagnant economy, and they change Europe quite a bit. However, the Crusades come at a very high cost. There's actually 9 Crusades. The Crusades come at a very high cost. There's actually 9 Crusades. We just read about the first Crusade, where the Crusaders took Jerusalem. But they come back 8 more times. And they're not really successful again. So there's all these missions that the church is giving to go on a crusade or a holy war. And what ends up happening is, in the Crusades, 2 to 6 million people, Europeans die. In the Crusades, 2 to 6 million Europeans die. So not 26, but 2 to 6. Somewhere in between there. We don't know the exact number. It's very hard to know how many people died in the Crusades, which were taking place over 200 years, when this happened like 900 years ago. It's hard to know how many people died. So the Crusades take place over 200 years, and 2 to 6 million people end up dying. It's a very high cost to Europe. But as we'll look at the next slide, they do bring a lot of good things to Europe after the Crusades are done. Yep, 2 to 6.